Welcome to my channel. I never imagined my life would come. Tothis, a woman in her mid-40s, standing alone in a beautiful house feeling more invisible than ever. My husband, Wasaways, on his business trips stretched from days into weeks, and when he did return, his presence felt more like a formality than a reunion. We barely spoke beyond small talk. Intimacy was something hadn't shared in years. I kept up appearances, cooked, cleaned, smiled at neighbors, but inside I was fading. It was early spring. When my husband told me he'd be leaving again, this time for nearly a month, I nodded, pretending to understand. As always, I didn't protest. It never did. I had accepted this life, or at least I thought I had. Just a week after left my stepson, Aiden, returned from college for spring break. He was 22, Talpolite, and had always kept a respectful distance. I had raised him since he was in middle school, so our relationship had always been a quiet, formal bond, but Noah was a man, and something about the way he looked at me had changed. It wasn't inappropriate, not at first, but it was different. I noticed his eyes lingered a little longer. His compliments, once casual, now felt personal. "You look beautiful today," he said one morning in the kitchen, his voice warm. I laughed it off, but my heart fluttered. We started spending more time together, mostly by coincidence. He'd help with groceries, offer to cook dinner with me, sit beside me during late-night TV shows. I tried toying the growing tension, but I wasn't blind. I felt it every time his hand brushed against mine, every time. He stood just a little too close. One evening, Wes sat on the porch watching the sunset, told me he admired how the first held the familiar toger. How strong I was for his father. He didn't know how to respond. I had never been praised like that, not in years. Something about his voice, gentle but the ness cut through the wall I had built around myself. I looked at him and saw more than my stepson. I saw a man who saw him, a man who noticed I was alive that night. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our conversations, the way he looked at the way I didn't pull away. I told myself it was harmless, but deep down, I knew I was lying. I knew this was marathon. Loneliness. I had crossed an emotional line I could no longer deny. When I saw him again the next morning, his smile made me nervous. I was beginning to crave that attention, that feeling of being wanted, even if it was wrong. For the first time in a long while I fell awake, but I also felt afraid. I hadn't done anything, not yet, but I knew I was close, and if something didn't stop soon, I wasn't sure I'd be able to walk away from what was coming. Duty happened on a Thursday evening. The house was quiet, and the air felt heavier than usual. I had just finished dinner when the rain started falling hard, followed a sudden power outage with no lights, no distractions, and only candles forward. The atmosphere shifted. Aiden walked into the living room, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you could use this," he said, smiling gently. He hesitated, but took the glass. We sat in silence, the only sound being the rain tapping against the windows. The wind loosened my guard. Our conversation drift from memories to emotions. He opened up about how lost he'd felt lately, how much he appreciated buying home, how being around me made him feel safe. I listened, comforted by the honest Ethan. He said something that stopped me cold. "You don't even realize how incredible you are, do you?" I looked at him confused, but he didn't look away. "Observe someone who sees you," he continued, "someone who actually makes you feel alive." My heart pounded. I wanted Toddy's miss it to tell him this was inappropriate, but I didn't. Instead, I let his words soak in. I was starving for affection, for validation. And at that man, it didn't matter who was giving it. I told him that sometimes I felt like I was fading in this house, like no one really saw me anymore. He reached for my hand, held it gently, and I didn't pull away. It felt so natural, so quiet, like woo had arrived here, not by choice, but by force of circumstance. His touch wasn't forceful. It wasn't aggressive. It was tender and sincere. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. His eyes weren't just looking at me. They were holding me, filling in the spaces my husband had long abandoned. He leaned closer. I should have stopped him. Our lips touched softly, slowly. It was A kiss that said more than words ever could. It wasn't wild or rushed, it was deep and full of emotions we had both buried. When it ended, we sat in silence, both knowing we had crossed a boundary we couldn't undo. I stood up, said I needed to go to bed, and left him sitting there. Without another word, but sleep didn't come. My heart raced, my thoughts spiraled. I knew what we hadn't was wrong. It wasn't just a kiss, it was betrayal, not just of my husband, Budoff. Everything I thought I stood for, and yet a part of me didn't feel regret. A part of me felt awakened, seen, touched in a way I had forgotten was possible. It couldn't explain it. I didn't even want to, but I knew that nothing would be the same again. Something inside of me had shifted, something I could never put back. Next morning, I avoided eye contact. I moved through the kitchen like everything was normal, but nothing felt same. Aiden entered the room, casual libet. I noticed the change in his demeanor, calm, confident, like a line had been crossed, and he wasn't sorry for it. Hayford to help with breakfast. I nodded without looking up. The tension between us was silent, but undeniable. We didn't speak of the kiss, neither of us brought it up, but it hung in the air like a secret too loud to ignore. I kept telling myself it was just a moment, a week, a lapsing judgment. But when his hand brushed against mine again, I didn't move. When Hestud closed behind me to reach for a plate, I felt my body react, shame and excitement, weird inside me. Later that day, I caught him watching me, not in a careless way, but with intention. His eyes studied me, my face, my movements, every detail like it mattered. I hadn't felt that kind of attention in years. Not from me husband, not from anyone. It was wrong, he knew it, but I couldn't stop myself from wanting more of it. Aiden began spending more time at home than with his friends. He made excuses to be near my movie nights, errands, walks. Our conversations deepened. He asked about my childhood, my dreams, what I had given up over the years. I realized how much off myself I had buried for the sake of a marriage that gave me nothing back. It tried to set boundaries, I told him. This couldn't continue, that it was dangerous and reckless. He listened, nodded. Evan apologized, but the next moment he found him alone. He whispered that he couldn't stop thinking about me, that I deserved more than being left behind by a man who didn't even notice when I cried myself to sleep, and every word felt like any Dell stitching me back together. One night he touched my face and said, "You didn't have to keep pretending you're allowed to feel something again." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, the way I look. Dadam said enough. The emotional line had long been crossed. What followed was unplanned. It was inevitable. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was a woman torn between guilt and desire, between loyalty and the aching need Tobe wanted. I told myself I was still in control, that I could stop this before it went too far, but the truth was I had already fallen, and yet I feared the consequences, not just of being found out, but of what would happen when he left again, when his break ended. And I would be alone in this house once more. Would take this version of me with him, or would I be left broken again? This time be a mistake I could never undo? Aiden's break was coming to an end, and through it, of what we had done began to press harder on both of us. I could see it in his quiet moments, the way he looked at me but said less. Something about our silence now felt heavier and intimate. Guilty, he started packing, and with every folded shirt I felt pieces of me, fragile world, collapsing. We had crossed a line, yes, but what now? We never spoke about what would happen next. Hadn't promised anything, and Aideneski didn't want illusions. I had lived Longino, wrapped in false security, with a husband who barely noticed me, but this was different. It was raw, intense, seemed wrong, but real, and now it had two ends. Night before his departure, he committed me unsure for the first time since this began. He didn't reach for me. He just looked at me like he wanted to say something, but couldn't. "I don't regret anything," he said quietly, "but I don't want to ruin your life either." I nodded, unable to respond. My throat tightened. He wasn't sure if it was heartbreak or left when he left the next morning. He stood at the door like a stranger watching someone walk out of her life without ceremony. No goodbyes, no promises. A moment cut short, the house returned to its stillness. But this time, I felt colder. Days passed, and my husband returned as if nothing had changed. He brought back souvenir stories from meetings. Spoke about business deals over dinner. He didn't notice the way I avoided his eyes. Hadn't noticed how hollow I'd become. I had given myself to someone else emotionally, physically. And it showed blatantly to me. At first, I thought I'd be consumed by guilt. But instead, I felt unatching sadness, not just for what I hadn't, but for the years I had wasted feeling invisible. The betrayal wasn't just in the kiss or the touch. It was in realizing that someone who wasn't even supposed to matter had seen me more clearly. In a week than my husband had in years, Aiden texted once a simple message, "Take care of yourself." I stared at it for hours before deleting it. I knew we couldn't continue, and I also knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I had changed, and that change was in something I could reverse in the end. I was left with a marriage still intact on the surface, but completely hollow inside. I lived each day beside a man loathed. Everything was fine while I carried the weight of choices I couldn't take back, and maybe that's the real punishment. Not being caught, but having to live with the truth in silence. I learned that love without attention is just habit, and attention without commitment is just temptation. Somewhere in between, I lost a version of myself. Never get back.